never thought I'd see my daughter's hands shake the way they did that morning. Celeste had been through hell and back, literally pulled from flames 6 months earlier. And here she was, standing in our hallway mirror, trying to decide if she was brave enough to face 300 strangers at a military ceremony. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. The burn scars stretched across her arms like a map of courage I was still learning to read. They covered nearly half her face, turning what used to be smooth skin into a landscape of healing pink and white. But that wasn't what made my heart race as we drove to the base that Tuesday morning in October. It was the way she kept pulling her sleeves down. The way she'd practiced her acceptance speech 50 times but couldn't look me in the eye while saying it. My daughter, who once dove into a burning apartment to save our 80-year-old neighbor, Mrs. Cordelia, was terrified of walking across a stage to receive the recognition she'd earned. "Mom, what if they can't look at me?" she whispered as we pulled into the parking lot of Fort Henderson's main auditorium. What if I'm too much? I wanted to tell her she was perfect. I wanted to lie and say it wouldn't matter. But Celeste had already been through 6 months of stares, of children pointing, of adults turning away. She knew better than anyone how cruel the world could be to people who looked different, even when they'd been broken by heroism. The ceremony was supposed to honor civilian heroes, people who'd risked everything to save others. Celeste qualified twice over. She'd not only saved Mrs. Cordelia's life, but stayed with her in the hospital for weeks afterward, reading to her through bandaged hands, refusing painkillers so she could be alert enough to provide comfort. But as we walked toward those double doors, I realized this wasn't just about an award. This was about whether my daughter would ever believe she deserved to take up space in the world again. What I didn't know was that inside that auditorium sat General Thaddeus Blackwood, a decorated war hero whose own scars would change everything. We thought we knew about judgment, courage, and what it really means to be broken for something bigger than yourself. The moment Celeste walked through those doors, heads turned. Conversations stopped. And in the silence that followed, I held my breath, knowing that whatever happened next would either rebuild my daughter's faith in humanity or destroy what little confidence she had left. 6 months earlier, Celeste had been everything I dreamed my daughter would become. 22 years old, straight A's in pre-med at State University, already accepted into the military medical program that would pay for her medical school in exchange for service as an Army doctor. She volunteered at the free clinic downtown. Every Thursday, spoke fluent Spanish with our neighbors, and had this laugh that could fill a room. The girl sitting next to me in that car was a shadow of that person. The fire had started at 2 in the morning on April 15th. Celeste was home for spring break, sleeping in her childhood bedroom when she heard screaming from next door. Mrs. Cordelia, our 80-year-old neighbor who'd baked us cookies every Christmas since we moved to Maple Street, was trapped on the second floor of her duplex while flames engulfed the staircase. The fire department was still 12 minutes away when Celeste made her choice. She grabbed our garden hose, soaked herself with water from our pool, and ran straight into that inferno. She found Mrs. Cordelia collapsed in her bedroom, unconscious from smoke inhalation. The ceiling was already starting to buckle when Celeste threw the elderly woman over her shoulder and stumbled back through the burning hallway. She saved a life that night, but the cost was written across her body in ways that would never fade. The burns covered her left arm completely, crawled up her neck like angry vines, and claimed the left side of her face from her jaw to her temple. 40% of her body had been touched by those flames, and even after 7 surgeries, 3 skin grafts, and months of physical therapy, she still looked at herself like she was broken beyond repair. "I used to be pretty, Mom," she'd told me just last week, staring at her reflection while changing the dressing on her neck. "Now I'm just scary." That word scary had gutted me because I knew where it came from. The stares at the grocery store, the children who pointed until their parents yanked their hands down, the way her college friends had stopped calling after visiting her in the hospital, unable to hide their shock at what she'd become. My husband Dale had tried to convince her to start therapy, but Celeste refused. "What's a therapist going to tell me that I don't already know? That I look like a monster now?" That everyone sees the scars before they see me? Her younger brother Donovan had been different. The day she came home from the hospital, he'd looked at her scars and said, "Cool, now you look like a superhero who actually fought the villain instead of just talking about it." He was 19, studying engineering at community college, and somehow he was the only person who could still make Celeste smile. But even Donovan couldn't fix what had happened to her confidence. Before the fire, Celeste had been planning to specialize in emergency medicine. She'd wanted to be the doctor who saved people in their worst moments. Now she could barely leave the house without a long-sleeve shirt and scarf, even in 90-degree weather. The military ceremony invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, signed by General Thaddeus Blackwood himself. The Civilian Heroism Award, they called it, recognizing individuals who'd risked their lives to save others. The letter described her actions as exemplary courage in the face of mortal danger, and invited her to receive the honor at Fort Henderson's quarterly recognition ceremony. "You have to go," I'd told her that first day. "This is important, sweetheart. This is recognition for what you did." But as we sat in the parking lot that Tuesday morning, watching uniformed families walk into the auditorium with their heads held high, I wondered if I'd been wrong to push her. Celeste's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't unfasten her seatbelt. "Mom, look at them," she whispered, nodding toward a group of military wives walking past our car. "They're all so put together, so normal. What am I doing here?" I wanted to tell her she belonged there more than anyone, that her scars were proof of her heroism, not evidence of her brokenness. But I'd learned that Celeste didn't believe those words anymore, not from me or anyone else. What she needed was something I couldn't give her. She needed the world to see her the way Mrs. Cordelia did when she squeezed Celeste's scarred hand in the hospital and whispered, "You're my guardian angel." She needed someone to remind her that heroes don't always look like the movies. The moment we stepped through those auditorium doors, I felt Celeste's grip tighten on my arm. 300 people filled the space, all dressed in their finest clothes, all turning to look at the late arrivals. The conversations didn't just pause when they saw my daughter. They died completely. A woman in a navy dress near the entrance took one look at Celeste's scarred face and actually gasped, her hand flying to her mouth like she'd witnessed an accident. Her husband quickly pulled her away, but not before I saw him whisper something in her ear that made her shake her head sympathetically. "Maybe we should sit in the back," Celeste murmured, her voice so small it broke my heart. But an usher in military dress uniform approached us with a clipboard and a strained smile. "You must be the Hendersons. We have reserved seats for you in the 3rd row, center section." He glanced at Celeste's scars, and I watched his professional demeanor falter. "Although, if you'd prefer, we do have some available seating toward the rear of the auditorium. Might be more comfortable." The message was clear. They wanted us hidden. As we made our way down the aisle, the whispers followed us like a toxic cloud. I caught fragments that made my blood boil. "Oh my God, look at her face. Should she really be here? That's terrible, but maybe they could have warned people." A little girl, maybe 6 years old, tugged on her mother's sleeve and pointed directly at Celeste. "Mommy, what happened to that lady? Why does she look like that?" The mother's face went scarlet as she yanked her daughter's hand down. "Don't point, sweetie. It's rude." But instead of explaining or offering kindness, she scooped up her child and moved 3 rows away, as if whatever Celeste had might be contagious. Celeste noticed. Of course she noticed. "I can't do this," she whispered, stopping dead in the middle of the aisle. Everyone's staring. They're all thinking the same thing. Before I could respond, a group of military spouses seated to our right made their feelings crystal clear. One woman, perfectly manicured and wearing a silk blouse, leaned toward her friend and said in what she thought was a whisper, "I mean, I understand she's getting an award, but this is supposed to be a celebration. People brought their children." Her friend nodded knowingly. "It's just so uncomfortable. Maybe there's a different way to honor people like her without making everyone else feel awkward. People like her." As if heroism came with a dress code. I watched Celeste's shoulders curl inward, her head dropping as she pulled her sleeves down further. This was exactly what she'd feared, exactly what had kept her hiding in our house for 6 months. Not the Pain of her injuries. Not the physical therapy or the surgeries, but this, the judgment. The way people saw her scars as something shameful instead of something sacred. 2 officers in dress blues passed behind us, and I heard one mutter to the other, "Christ, they could have given her the award privately. This is a formal ceremony." That was the moment something inside me snapped. But before I could turn around and give those men a piece of my mind, Celeste grabbed my hand. "Mom, I want to leave. Please. I can't sit through this whole thing with everyone looking at me like I'm a freak show." Her voice cracked on the word freak, and I realized we were at a crossroads. I could protect her, take her home, let her hide for another 6 months or 6 years, or I could trust that somewhere in this room full of judgment was someone who would see what I saw when I looked at my daughter. The ceremony program crinkled in my hands as I gripped it tighter. General Thaddeus Blackwood was listed as the keynote speaker and award presenter, a decorated war hero, according to his bio, someone who understood sacrifice and service. 5 more minutes, I whispered to Celeste. "If you still want to leave, after they introduce the general, we'll go. But honey, you earned this. You saved a life. These people need to know what real courage looks like." Celeste looked around the room one more time, seeing the turned backs, the uncomfortable glances, the whispered conversations about her appearance. For a moment, I thought she was going to bolt for the exit. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and walked to our seats. The ceremony began with all the pomp and circumstance you'd expect from a military event. Colors presented, national anthem sung, speeches about service and sacrifice delivered by officials who'd probably never risked anything more dangerous than a paper cut. I kept glancing at Celeste, watching her hands twist in her lap every time. Someone looked our way. 20 minutes in, the master of ceremonies took the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce our keynote speaker and award presenter, General Thaddeus Blackwood." The applause was thunderous as a tall, silver-haired man in full dress uniform strode across the stage. Even from our third-row seats, his presence was commanding. Ribbons and medals covered the left side of his chest, and when he spoke, his voice carried the kind of authority that made 300 people fall silent instantly. "Service," he began, "is not about the uniform you wear or the rank on your collar. It's about the moment you choose someone else's life over your own comfort. Today, we honor individuals who made that choice without training, without orders, and without backup." His eyes swept the audience, and for just a second, I thought they lingered on our section. On Celeste. "We will now recognize our civilian heroes," he continued. "First, we honor Marcus Chen for his actions during the highway accident on Interstate 75. I watched Marcus, a middle-aged man in a crisp suit, walk confidently to the stage. Applause filled the room. General Blackwood shook his hand, posed for photos, handed him his award. Standard ceremony protocol. Marcus looked comfortable, proud, completely at ease in the spotlight. 2 more recipients followed. A woman who'd performed CPR on a drowning child, a man who'd stopped a robbery at gunpoint. Each walked to the stage with confidence. Each received warm applause and genuine smiles from the audience. Each looked exactly like what these people expected a hero to look like. Then the general's voice rang out again. "Our final honoree today demonstrated extraordinary courage in the face of mortal danger. Miss Celeste Henderson saved the life of her neighbor by entering a burning building, carrying an unconscious woman to safety, while sustaining severe injuries herself." The applause that followed was different. Polite, obligatory, scattered. I could feel the discomfort rippling through the crowd as they remembered why we were there, what Celeste looked like, how her presence had disrupted their comfortable afternoon. Celeste didn't move. She sat frozen in her chair, staring at her scarred hands folded in her lap. "Sweetheart," I whispered, "they called your name." "I can't," she breathed. "Mom, look at them. They don't want to see me up there." She was right. The audience was sitting in uncomfortable silence, some people actually looking away from our row, as if averting their eyes would make the awkwardness disappear. The photographer had positioned himself at an angle that would avoid capturing her scars. Even the general seemed to be waiting with practiced patience, like he'd done this kind of duty before. But something made me look closer at General Blackwood. While everyone else in that room was radiating discomfort, his expression was different. He wasn't looking at Celeste with pity or professional obligation. There was something in his eyes I couldn't quite identify. Recognition, maybe, or understanding. "Celeste," I said, taking her scarred hand in both of mine, "you saved Mrs. Cordelia's life. You carried her out of that fire when no one else would. These people need to see what real courage looks like." She looked at me then, and I saw the war happening behind her eyes. The part of her that wanted to run, to hide, to spare everyone, the discomfort of looking at her, and the part that remembered who she used to be, who she'd been in that moment when flames couldn't stop her from doing what was right. "What if I trip?" she whispered. "What if I can't get the words out?" "Then, you trip," I said, "and you get back up, just like you did in that fire." The silence in the auditorium was becoming painful. General Blackwood cleared his throat gently, still waiting, still watching our row with that unreadable expression. Celeste took a shaky breath, squeezed my hand once, and stood up. The walk to that stage was the longest 30 seconds of my life. Every step she took, I held my breath. The audience watched in uncomfortable silence as my scarred, beautiful, heroic daughter made her way toward a man who would either see her for who she truly was or reduce her to just another awkward moment in his military career. When she reached the podium, General Blackwood stepped forward, and I realized we were all about to discover which kind of man he really was. General Blackwood looked at Celeste for a long moment, taking in her scarred face and arms with an expression I still couldn't read. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, and I saw my daughter's shoulders start to shake. She was about to break down in front of 300 people. Then the general did something that stunned everyone in that auditorium. He set down the award, stepped back from the podium, and began unbuttoning his dress uniform jacket. "Miss Henderson," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "before I present you with this recognition, I need to share something with these people." He slipped off his jacket and handed it to an aide. Then, deliberately and without hesitation, he rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt. The gasps from the audience were audible. His arms were a roadmap of burn scars, thick and ropey, covering his skin from his wrists to his elbows. The scars were old, faded to white and pink, but unmistakably the result of severe burns. He held his arms out so everyone could see, and the auditorium fell into absolute silence. 23 years ago, General Blackwood began, I was a young captain leading a convoy through Afghanistan when our lead vehicle hit an IED. The explosion flipped our Humvee and sparked a fire that spread faster than anyone could have imagined. He looked directly at Celeste as he spoke, and I saw something pass between them that made my throat tight. My men followed protocol. They assessed the situation, determined the vehicle was too dangerous to approach, and prepared to leave me behind. It was the right call tactically, the smart call, the safe call. The general moved closer to the microphone, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a weight that made everyone lean forward. But Staff Sergeant Elena Torres didn't care about protocol that day. She saw her captain trapped in a burning vehicle, and she made a choice. She ignored direct orders from her commanding officer. She ran straight into those flames and pulled me out while the gas tank was seconds from exploding. I heard someone in the audience whisper, "Oh my God," and I realized people were starting to understand what this man was telling them. "Sergeant Torres saved my life," he continued, "but the flames took their toll on both of us. I suffered burns over 30% of my body. She suffered worse, much worse." He paused and I watched him swallow hard before continuing. "Elena. Torres died 2 weeks later from her injuries. She was 24 years old, barely older than Miss Henderson here. Before she died, she made me promise something. She said, 'Sir, don't ever let anyone tell you that scars make you less than what you were. They make you proof of what you survived.'" The general turned to face the audience fully, his scarred arms still visible to everyone. When I look at Miss Henderson's scars, I don't see someone who was damaged by fire. I see someone who understood What Sergeant Torres understood, that some people are worth burning for. He walked over to Celeste, who was openly crying now, and placed his scarred hand on her scarred arm. Ladies and gentlemen, you are looking at two people who have been marked by flames, but we weren't marked by accident or misfortune. We were marked by choice. The choice to run toward danger when others run away. The choice to value someone else's life more than our own safety. The general's voice grew stronger, more commanding. Miss Henderson, when you ran into that burning apartment, you joined a brotherhood of people who understand that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action in the presence of fear. Your scars don't tell the story of what broke you. They tell the story of what couldn't break you. He picked up her award and placed it in her hands. Every person in this room owes their freedom to people who were willing to be scarred for something bigger than themselves. Today we honor not just your actions, but what your actions represent. True heroism, true sacrifice, true courage. The applause started slowly, from somewhere in the back of the room. Then it grew, person by person, until 300 people were on their feet clapping for my daughter. Not in pity, not in obligation, in respect. And in that moment, watching Celeste stand tall beside a general who saw her for exactly what she was, I knew my daughter had found her way back to herself. The standing ovation seemed to last forever, but for the first time in 6 months, Celeste didn't try to hide from the attention. She stood beside General Blackwood, both of them marked by fire, both of them proof that heroism comes with a price worth paying. When the applause finally died down, something extraordinary happened. People started approaching us, not with the careful, pitying expressions we'd grown used to, but with genuine respect and curiosity. The same woman who had gasped at Celeste's appearance when we entered was the first to reach us after the ceremony. "I owe you an apology," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I was so focused on how you looked that I forgot to see who you are. My husband served 2 tours overseas, and he's told me about people like you. Real heroes. I'm ashamed of my reaction." A young man in an army uniform, probably 19 or 20, waited his turn to speak with Celeste. "Ma'am, I'm deploying to Germany next month for medical training. After hearing your story and the general's, I want you to know that if I ever have to make the choice you made, I hope I have half your courage." But the moment that broke me completely came when a little girl, maybe 8 years old, walked up to Celeste with her mother's permission. The same child who had pointed and asked what was wrong with that lady now looked up at my daughter with wide, admiring eyes. "Are you a real superhero?" she asked. "Because my mom says superheroes get scars when they save people, and yours must mean you saved someone really important." Celeste knelt down to the little girl's level, and for the first time in months, I saw her old smile. "I saved my friend, Mrs. Cordelia. She's very important to me. What's your name, sweetheart?" "Isabella. Will you sign my program? I want to show my teacher that I met a real hero." As Celeste signed the program with hands that still bore the evidence of her sacrifice, I realized that General Blackwood had given my daughter something I never could have. Not just validation, but perspective. She wasn't alone in carrying these marks. She was part of something bigger. Later, as we walked to our car, Celeste was quieter than I'd expected, but it was a different kind of quiet, thoughtful instead of defeated. "Mom," she said, "I want to go back to school." "Are you sure, honey? You don't have to rush anything." "No, I want to go back now, this semester. I've been hiding long enough." She looked at her scarred hands, then back at me. The general was right. These scars tell a story, and it's not a story about being broken. It's a story about being strong enough to break for something that mattered. 3 months later, Celeste re-enrolled in her pre-med program. But instead of emergency medicine, she chose a different specialty: burn treatment and trauma recovery. She said she wanted to help other people navigate the journey she'd walked, both the physical healing and the harder work of healing from the world's reaction to visible difference. General Blackwood stayed in touch, calling once a month to check on her progress. He connected her with other burn survivors in the military, people who understood that scars could be badges of honor instead of sources of shame. A year after that ceremony, Celeste spoke at Fort Henderson's next recognition event. This time she was on the stage by choice, addressing a room full of military families about the true meaning of sacrifice and service. Her scars were visible, uncovered by long sleeves or makeup, and when she spoke about running into that fire to save Mrs. Cordelia, her voice was steady and proud. The best part wasn't that people no longer stared, some still did. The best part was that Celeste no longer cared about the stares because she finally understood what General Blackwood and Staff Sergeant Torres had known all along. Heroes aren't defined by how they look after the fire, they're defined by their willingness to run toward the flames when someone needs saving. And sometimes the most beautiful thing about a person is written in the scars they earned by refusing to let someone else burn alone. My daughter learned that day that she wasn't broken by her scars. She was completed by them.